Welcome to another episode of Close Mode, the enterprise sales show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. And today I'm really fortunate to be speaking with Mike Conti, who's VP of Sales. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here.
So now we're talking business in the pre-show. Today is the day after the National Football Championship, so we got that out of our system. So we won't do our podcast on Washington, Michigan. So, in our pre-interview a couple weeks or so ago, we were just kind of rambling and got onto the buyer journey, which I think we're all kind of familiar with, and you mentioned the emotional buyer journey, and it struck me because I haven't. Maybe I've heard of it, maybe not, but I haven't spent a lot of time there, and I was curious about it. And you were kind enough to send me over some reading materials. But that's what I'd love to talk to you about today and share with some of our folks who aren't as familiar with it. So at one point, we're going to kind of walk through some of the phases. But at a high level, how would you describe the emotional buyer journey? What is it?
Sure. The emotional buyer journey is really something that I learned early in my career from Carnegie, but I never really understood it until someone said to me, "Hey, buyers make emotional decisions and support them with logic."
Yeah.
And that really struck me because I recognized the fact that I was trying to sell to people based upon what I thought and the logic should be for them to buy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really working that well. And so I started to recognize, hey, wait a second, these people are going through emotions.
Yeah.
And so what are those emotions? And then I started to think more about it. It's attention, interest, desire, conviction, risk assessment, and close. Those are the emotional stages. And, we all go through those stages in everything we do, every buying decision we ever make. We just go through them faster if the item is very commodity, very inexpensive. So, for example, if you're driving down the street and you're hungry and you like hamburgers and you see Burger King, let's see, attention, yup. Interest, yeah, I'm hungry. Desire, yeah, if I don't eat now, I'm going to even be more hungry later. Conviction, I like hamburgers. You're in there, you buy the hamburger, you did it in 2 minutes, right? Pretty fast.
Yeah.
Buy an appliance and it's, well, I go in and I do a little research. I look at the different publications. Then I go to a store, I price a couple, boom, I buy it. Okay. Then a house. Well, wait a second. There's a couple more decision makers now. I got to worry about more things. It takes long. It's a higher price. It takes longer. Okay. Now let's go to enterprise software. Okay. There's lots of competitors. There's lots of different opinions about the problem. There's lots of influencers. There's lots of decision makers. The the price is potentially in the millions. So now you're talking about a very elongated cycle that you have to get right. And so understanding that journey is important. And then understanding the activities that you and the buyer are executing in that journey.
Right.
One of the things that became obvious to me was, hey, I can tell where the buyer is in this journey by what they're doing. And so the alignment of the activities, and then what I'm doing requires resources. So when you align the emotional journey with your activity and the resources, you have a better chance to do the next best thing in the sales cycle to move the sale in the most efficient manner. And so that's the whole purpose of the the buyer's emotional journey. Tracking that journey and understanding where you are in it gives you a much better chance of developing and closing a sale. And
I'm sorry, Mike. What's
yeah,
interesting, at the outset, you had mentioned about, people buying emotionally sort of versus rationally or logically. And it's interesting because I just read a blog about buyers, very often making suboptimal decisions, right? Focusing on the wrong thing out of context, and I often say to people, you won a lot of deals that maybe you shouldn't have won because the buyer made a crappy buy, or you lost a
yeah,
lot, which is even more frustrating, right? Because,
yeah,
it was clear. And yeah, and it's funny because I've always taken that back to where they using the right criteria, where the right people involved. And you just got me thinking that maybe they were focusing or deleting criteria that were important because of the emotional journey.
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, that happens all the time, actually, and I actually watch it in sales cycles. They do. They add or delete things based on where they picture themselves and how they picture the outcome emotionally. And so they will eliminate criteria because in the at the end of the day, it's what they feel the most comfortable with emotionally.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's exactly right.
Interesting. So let's hit. I want to hit. I think there's six phases in the document you sent over to me, and I know we'll be our friendly producer Dan is going to be sharing that graphic. So,
Yes, we have a nice graphic, and it's easy to follow when you see it all in one picture. And actually, it creates a framework for the salesperson and the manager, which I'll talk about later what the benefits of that are, to really understand their cycle and what they're doing and how productive they're being. So it'll be a good thing to look at. But let's go through it
yeah,
phase by
let's go
phase.
through it. But before we do, let's just remind Dan. Don't forget the graphic, right? Can we just get that in front of him one more time? He's counting them in the little dialogue box here. I guess this is like a drinking game. Every time we
There
say
you go.
graphic to Dan, someone has to do a shot. So okay, yeah,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I pulled you off track. So what's the first
So
phase?
the first phase is attention. So at the beginning, the buyer doesn't know you and you don't know the buyer, right? And so
Yeah.
your job as a salesperson is to create awareness. The buyer is, of course, on the internet, on the web. And so you need to figure out how to make them aware. And so that's the first, get their attention is basically the first phase. And
Is that
typically, you're using marketing and you're using resources to do that. You're not doing that yourself, which is another important part of why you need to understand the emotional cycle, because you don't have to do everything. You have resources that
yeah,
are built and meant to do some of those things if you use them properly.
yeah. Cool. Yeah, you just hit my second question, which is whose job is that? Great. All right, what's the second phase?
Okay, interest. So you've got their attention. How do I create interest? So you create interest by creating curiosity, right? And so you want to make the buyer curious about your solution. And the way you do that is you focus on the buyer and their problem, right? Bless you. So the
Thank you.
problem is the buyer doesn't care about your product. In fact, if you're an early stage company, the buyer doesn't even know what your product does, doesn't doesn't have any idea how you solve a problem,
Yeah.
and they don't define the problem in terms of your solution to begin with because they never heard of it. So talking about your solution is really not a good idea at this phase, right? You want to talk to them about the challenges they face and about the problems they have. And if you're really good at creating curiosity, you learn to take the things that they're telling you as symptoms, group them together,
Yeah.
and then start to challenge the prospect to think about whether or not these problems are actually these symptoms are actually caused by some root cause that they haven't thought of. Now that root cause is going to typically be tied to the unique way your product does things, but remember, you
Right.
haven't talked about the product yet.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how you want to generate interest.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. And by the way, we see that a lot, and we've written a report on this recently about that notion of symptom versus root cause. It's like, oh,
Right.
margins are down, ASP is down. Okay, cool. That's not the problem. So, all right, next
Right.
phase.
Desire. So desire is motivation, right? It's really about taking latent pain and making it acute. That's a talent, right? Nobody addresses latent pain. They just let it go. And by the way, that's 95% of the market is latent pain. So if you're good at elevating latent pain to acute pain, boy, you're going to have a big pipeline. You're going to sell a lot of stuff because you're going to have more prospects that are
Yep.
more likely to buy. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing, as I said earlier, you focus on the problem. You
Yep.
have to hurt them. You have to make them feel pain. But then you have to make them feel hope. If you make them feel pain and then you make them feel hope, you're going to get them to motivated in and to make that pain acute. Why? Because they had all these symptoms before, these problems they thought were problems, but now they're symptoms. And now they're symptoms of something that's at a root cause that they hadn't considered. So if I could solve 3 or 4 problems with one approach that's different than what I've been doing,
Yeah.
I'm going to become motivated to do that, right? And so that's how you elevate latent pain to acute pain. And when you do that, now you have a prospect that's actually going to move from that 95% of the market that's not looking for a solution to the 5% of the market that is. And those are your buyers.
Yeah, you
Now,
just. I'm sorry, Mike. You just led me into. I want to go back to the latent pain thing because I was wondering, and I think you just kind of got there. Does latent pain tend to follow a pattern? Right, it's not just latent pain for this customer, but typically, given what you're selling and the business problems you solve, is there latent pain that you might be able to find in a lot of your prospects?
yes, in fact, just about all of them. If you think about it, right, if you have an approach to something that solves a problem, right, well, chances are pretty good everybody's got the problem. They're just not looking at the problem the way you solve it because buyers never define problems in terms of solutions they don't know exist. So no one's walking into their boss and saying, "Hey, boss, we got a really big problem. There's no solution to it."
Yeah. Yes.
Right? So when you've redefined that problem in terms of the uniques in your product without necessarily talking about your product, you've created hope. Now, if somebody's got 5 things that are bothering them or that are causing them an issue or causing them pain, and they look at it differently and can solve it with one action, that's motivational,
Yeah.
and they're going to probably want to do that. So that's the biggest piece of it. The second part of that phase of desire is then presenting the solution. But before you do that, you want problem vision alignment. You need to get the buyers or the audience and the stakeholders to say, yes, this is my problem. The way you've defined my problem is my problem. The reason that's important is you're the only one with the solution now because you've tied it to the unique things and approach you have, right? And so now you're going to win. In the end of the day, your issue is going to be your product or nothing. They're going to come down to deciding on you or nothing because they already know the other approaches are not like your approach.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to be. I like competing with nothing as opposed to competing on features and functions where I'm going to get down a price.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the desire part of the cycle.
Yeah.
It's also what I call, so I often analogize selling enterprise software to playing Texas Hold'em. Your first 2 phases of attention interest are the 2 cards you look at. If you don't have, if you can't develop interest, you're going to throw the cards in. This desire phase is the flop, right? You're not all in yet, but you're looking at those cards and you're deciding whether you're going to go all in. And if you do go all in, you have to win. And the next phase of conviction is all in. Why? Because that's where you're going to put all your resource. That's where you're going to start to have to prove the solution. Now, there's a lot of different ways to prove. You can prove with ROI, you can prove with references if you have them. But if it's early stage, you're probably going to have to prove with some kind of technical proof. And the reason for that is because when you're in this dynamic where the executives go, oh, wow, this is great if it works, they're not the users.
Right.
And so they know that if they can't get the people who have to actually use it to use it, it doesn't do them any good, right? So you're selling, you have to remember that you're selling to the executive buyer and the user buyer. So the dialogue you want kind of to happen is you want the executive to say to the user, is this the problem? And the user to say, well, yeah, this is the problem. And then the buyer to say, will you use this? And them to say, well, if it does what it says it does, yeah, we'll use it. That's
Yes.
kind of the yin and the yang of what you need to get that done. But that's a lot of resources. And you have to have at this point, and I tell all my sales teams is you need commitment from the executive funding source and the power influences that if you, in fact, prove the value and it works, that they're going to buy.
Yes.
Because if you don't have that and you go in, and I see a lot of salespeople make this mistake. Well, they do all this work for their coach or champion to hope to earn the right to get to the funding source. And I'm always like, no, 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 we're not going to do that. We're going to go to the funding source first, and we're going to ask them if we're successful, can they buy? Because a lot of times you'll find out, I love this, it's great, but we have these other three priorities that are going to take the money. We can't do it now.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I don't want to ever spend, because guess what? I put all my money, all my chips are in, which is my time. If I lose, I can't make that up. I can't come back from that. So
Yeah.
I have to know I'm going to win. And that's the conviction part of the cycle. Risk assessment is interesting. They're now not, if you've convinced them that they're going to, that this solution works, risk assessment is about buying your product and doing nothing. And so that's something you have to prepare for and be ready for,
Yeah.
right? Because doing nothing, because typically when you bring in new technology, it's not just about the technology, right? It's about the organizational change, the process change. Certain people feel threatened, it's new. There's all kinds of things that a buyer thinks about that are not related to the product. And you have to focus the buyer on the desired state where they want to go. You have to prepare them. Look, you're gonna have to change. You're
Yeah.
going to have to deal with these organizational things. You want them to understand that before they go into a proof phase, right? Because the one thing that's going to happen in the proof phase is they're going to find out, yeah, that's the case. We're going to have all this change. So you might as well tell them up front, because you don't want it to be them coming back to you and say, well, you didn't tell me about all of these things that are going to happen to me, right? So this is kind of the space where they go, okay, I know what it's going to do for me. What's it going to do to me? And so you have to be prepared and prepare the buyer for that. But if you focus them on the ROI, on the reasons they're doing it, on the business problems you're solving, you should be able to get through that phase. A lot of times that's the phase where you'll hear good salespeople tell you, all great deals die once. Well, that's when they go radio silent, right in the risk
Yeah.
assessment.
Yeah.
And so you have to, be prepared. They're going to come out the other side of the moon. It's just, you've been working with them that you're going to hear. And if you focused on them on the things and prepared them, you're going to hear good news at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting to me because the theme for me is yeah. Earlier when you were saying, well, if it does what it says it does, and then you've mentioned new a couple times, and
Yep.
like contextually, my brain wasn't there that this is so different with a new, and Jim Dickey of Sales Mastery put out some research on as the perceived risk changes in a deal, so buyer behavior changes a lot, and that just keeps running through my mind as you're going through this, that these concepts you're talking about are even so much more important with a new technology.
Absolutely. In an early stage company, I've done six. So we had two IPOs and four successful exits. And this is the reason, right?
Yeah.
And I've been able to typically ramp on not a lot of money. This is the reason, because you've got to get to the emotions of the buyer, and you've got to figure out a cycle that's going to execute, that you can execute around that'll be successful, right?
And how much? I'm sorry, Mike, but another thing that comes to mind is the old FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So you kind of talked about the motivation. I can't remember the exact word that you used, but the flip side of that is especially with a do nothing competitor, that
Yep.
some of this is speaking to fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Or am I misreading that?
No, yeah. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is exactly what you're fighting as you get toward the end of the cycle, right? And that's why how you set that cycle up early around the pain, right? Hey, you got these five challenges. It's not one. I always use the analogy of Jonas Salk. So before penicillin was invented, I have I'm sneezing, I'm coughing, I'm wheezing, I've got a headache, I got a fever, I don't feel good, and what am I doing? I'm drinking chicken soup, and I'm taking whatever shots of whiskey, whatever I'm
Yeah.
doing, right, and I'm not getting better. Jonas Salk comes along and says, "Hey, those 5 things you're suffering from are caused by an antibody. It's a
Yeah.
germ.
Yeah.
And I've got this thing called an antibiotic that's going to kill the germ and make those 5 things go away."
Yeah.
Well, really? Great. Let me show. Hey, it worked, right? Well, guess what? We learned what an antibody is, what an antibiotic is, what penicillin was. Why? Because it solved those 5 things. And so when you can group pain like that and tie it to one root cause, which is your unique approach solves, that's how you really make the buyer not so worried about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because he's not solving one thing. He's solving a bunch of things that are causing him problem, and he's willing to take that risk. Because that's what I say about risk assessment, right? That's risk assessment mode. I will take the risk because the payoff is big enough.
Yeah.
And
So
so that's
you
what
said, just to
you
get this right. I'm sorry, because this I'm taking this down personally. So you were saying the 5 things with one root cause. That's
yes.
the math. Okay, cool.
Yep. And so when you get to close, you have, well, first of all, let me go back one little bit about conviction and risk assessment. Remember one thing about technology that you sell, especially if it's new or takes a unique approach. Your customer has no idea how to evaluate it, right? He doesn't know. And so you are going to have the ability to tell the customer how they're going to do it. And I'll
Wow.
tell a quick little story. I was in one client, and the client said, "Yeah, I want to try your product." And I said, "Great, it's $100,000." He goes, "What? I'm not going to pay $100,000 to try your product." I go, "Well, that's what I need you to do." He goes, "Why?" I said, "Well, because your people don't know this and they don't know that, and they have to use these other 3 technologies to make this work." And he's like, "Well, that that's not what we do." I said, "Then you might not be my buyer." He goes, "Well, what do you mean?" I go, "Look, if you want to have a contest between my SE and some other SE, and
Yep.
you want to, great, but you're just going to pick the one that you looked at last and the SE you like the best." I go, he goes, "Well, that's kind of how we do it." So I looked at him and I said, "Well, okay, well, I guess we can't do business, but let me ask you a question. One last question." I said, "What?" I said, "Is that how you evaluate software?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "And of the last 5 products, how many have you rolled out enterprise wide?" And he looks at me and he sheepishly holds up one finger and he goes, "And not all the way." I go, "That's what an SC to SC, the way you do it, gets you." And I left. He called me back 2 days later. He goes, "Okay, here's your money." And we ended up getting $2.5 million out of them in the next 6 months. So, you have to have the confidence that you know how to do this and how to help them understand the change, because they're going to feel that change right in the proof. So you
Yeah.
might as well introduce it to them and sort of get them used to it. Now you don't always have to charge $100,000. That's an extreme example, but you kind of get the idea. You've got to make them aware of the change.
Yeah, I just want to react to a couple of things. I love the idea, but they don't know how to evaluate your new technology. Again, something that's hitting me personally. Thank you for that. So oftentimes I will say to my team, and I'm wondering where this fits in the emotional journey, because I'm hearing pieces of it. Allow people you know what it's like when someone's coming at you, you tend to push back a little bit, and I often talk about allowing people to lean in, giving them the space to lean in. And that last story you just told was kind of like that. Is that where does that fit in the emotional buyer journey? Where do you give people the space to lean in?
You got to give them the space to lean in desire and conviction, where you got to get them to buy into the problem definition and the hope of the solution. And
Okay.
then you've got to get them to lean in around the change, right? Because they're going to have to encounter change. They're going to have to do different things, and there's risk in that. And so you got to let them really feel that and own that, because until they own it and until they can put themselves in that position to say, "All right, this is the scary stuff that might happen." And then you go through it in the proof and you let them see something. Okay, it wasn't that bad.
Yes.
And then you keep reminding them, think about how much pain you're in and how much this alleviated that pain, right? And so you got to let them feel it. Again, it comes down to emotion. they feel risk. They feel, well, God, people aren't going to like me if I make them do that. Oh, wait a second. Maybe they'll like me because their job's going to get easier.
Yeah.
I had one where I literally had to say, CIO, look, your people love the product, but they like the results. They're not going to suggest that you buy it. And he goes, why? I go, because they don't want to change. I said, and so what you need to do as the CIO is let them know that those people that embrace change are the ones that are going to have a faster promotion path. There's going to be a little bonus. I had to help him with culture because you're never going to get new technology in here if you don't have your people embrace it.
Yeah.
You got to set up a reward system for that and make that part of the culture. So they did, and we were successful. But so you have to. It all comes down to that emotion, really.
So, and you mentioned earlier that some of this is based on a Carnegie model. Was that right?
Yes,
So it's
yes,
funny too that the phrase that, like, when you first said that, for some reason a bell went off, and the phrase just came to mind about everything that's old is new again. and
yep,
and I've become more interested in EQ, or emotional intelligence, and as I'm listening to what you're saying and listening to referencing back to the Carnegie model, this is not unlike what's now branded as EQ, or emotional intelligence. You think that's
yes.
fair?
That's very fair.
Yeah.
Yep, that's very fair. And when you get to the last phase, which is close, you
Yeah.
have to remember I always do this with salespeople. Like, you got to understand, they probably don't know how to buy it either. So, okay, is it OpEx? Is it CapEx? How does your executive get purchasing to buy it? What do they have to provide to them to get a PO? Does it have to go through legal? Is the signing process electronic? How many signatures are there? What's the order? What do those people need to sign off? You have to get all of that information, or your deal's just going to sit there, because not because they don't want to buy it, they don't have.
Yeah.
And what it is each part of the buying, the people know pieces of it. Your job is to put it all together for them so they can tell each other what each other has to do so they can ultimately close the business.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man, one of the things that I love about doing this podcast, and I mean this sincerely, is I get to talk to smart and energized people, and I feel like I'm doing that today. The other thing is a selfish one. So I will tell you, I am heavily biased toward process analytics,
Yep.
ROI, and you have me leaning into this subject when I made that connection
Well,
to EQ. So thank you for that. And I know those things are important, but I somewhat, quite honestly, discounted some of this, and I'm hearing so much of it's ringing true. So thank you.
no, my pleasure. Let me tell you a little bit about metrics and process,
Yeah.
and where the value and benefits are. I know this is awesome because of the metrics I get.
Yes.
Right? One of the metrics I look at from this is, so if, again, in the graphic, you'll see all of the phases and all the activities, and you'll see the resources aligned to those activities. So one of the things people always ask me, well, how do you build strong teams? I go, well, first of all, you have to learn your people. You have to learn what they're good at, what they're not. Well, how do you tell that? Well, let me tell you, I know very right away. And people, how? I go, simple, days and cycle. When I look at this cycle, oh, you know, this rep's deals sit in desire a lot, longer than average. Huh. What's the skill that moves things from desire to conviction? It's the ability to do a presentation, it's the ability to align a problem with a solution. There's where that rep needs coaching. This one sits a long time in discovery. It doesn't get from interest to desire. That rep has an issue with how they build interest. These guys get all the way through the proof of concept and it sits there. This rep, So you look at days and cycle. Now, the flip side is also true. This rep gets through this cycle fast, this part of the cycle fast. These are the things they're good at. So, how do you build a great team? You start to take your people and say, look, you go talk to Bill about that. Oh, Joe, go talk to Mary about that. Man, so what you're doing is you're pushing your reps like a little hockey goalie back into the, into the playing field, into onto the ice, and you're having them go to the rep that's good at what they're not good at, and vice versa. And so they build respect for one another, and they also ramp faster because I'm not the sole single point of the coaching. They're getting it from each other, which are their peers, which is the best place they can get it from.
Yeah.
That's one value. The second one that I find a lot is okay, something's sitting a long time in a cycle for everybody. Now I have a systemic issue, right? My presentations aren't very good, or my discovery, the way I do discovery is as a whole, there's a problem in my process, or there's a problem with my enablement. People can't tell that today.
Yeah.
And the reason they can't tell it is because they build metrics around activity with no context for where it is in the cycle of the buyer. And so, I always like to define what's the definition of non-productivity? Activity without impact. Okay, why are you measuring activity that you can't prove the impact of? Because that's what you're doing when you just put all how many calls, how many this, how many that. It doesn't matter. Did it develop pipeline? Did it move a sale? And it's gotten so bad that they even so I have something I wrote in LinkedIn. Every BDR, SDR program I see is built to destroy pipeline. Now people go, that what do you mean? We build it. No, you're destroying pipeline. I'll tell you exactly why. Look in that emotional buyer's process. When do you do a demo and presentation? At desire. Okay. So what happens? We get a prospect and finally get a lead. And what do? We put a BDR on the phone to have a conversation with them to get them to a demo. Really? So when did we decide that having the least experienced person in our organization handling the first conversation with a prospect and getting them to a demo was a good idea? You have to build curiosity to build interest. So, what do I want you to be curious about? I want you to be curious about my solution. Okay, let me show it to you so you don't have to be curious about it anymore. And since I have no problem vision alignment, you're going to see something you don't like. So, I might as well kill interest at the same time. So that's what you're doing. You're
Yeah.
killing both, right? And so the truth about those programs is not that the companies have them for pipeline building. What they're there for is exactly what they're doing. They're trying to find people who are interested already and will buy in this quarter or next quarter, right? And how do I know that? You're doing a presentation. When do you do a presentation? When you have someone who's interested. So the reason you're doing that, your marketing people can't figure out, and this is a big challenge these days, how to get to the buyer. Either they don't have their search engine optimized, or their message isn't effective. So all the buyers are sitting on the internet, but we're not reaching them. So we're going to take SDRs and take our message and slam the decision makers and stakeholders so that we know our message got to them. That is an awful approach to building pipeline. And when you consider the fact that the latent market is 20 times the size of the active looking market, it shouldn't be that hard to build pipeline,
Wow.
right? So, if you're a salesperson out there and that's what your BDRs are doing, stop. Don't let them do that. You what you want them to do is to work with you in marketing on effective campaigns that focus on the buyer's problem. And when they get the buyer to respond, you want to be on that phone call. You don't want them handling that call. You want to handle that call, do the right discovery, and put them in the right cycle.
Two things. One comment, one question. Earlier, you helped me figure something out. There's a lot of sort of algorithmic tools out there now that are looking at your forecast, looking at your pipe, and then saying based on activities, based on math, what's next. And those are being called coaching tools. And I've been a little bit frustrated with that because what you just said, it's the how of what's next, right? That's the coaching. It's like here's the what, here's the
That's the
math,
coach.
and it's the how. That's yeah, that clarified for
I'm,
me
I'm
the difference.
watching most AI tools are going to just help people get to the wrong conclusions faster,
Yep.
right? Because they're they're building AI around the wrong process to begin with. So, for example, let you really let's update Salesforce with Gong and email. Oh, great! So you really think you're going to get discovery on a Zoom call that's being recorded? Okay. No one is going to share anything on that call that they wouldn't feel comfortable sharing in front of the whole group, which means, and publicly, which means what? That you're going to hear the same pablum your competitors are hearing. Real discovery that wins business is one on one, it's confidential, and you're never going to put it in the CRM.
Yeah.
Why? Because if somebody misuses that information, they don't know that they're not supposed to know it. You just blew up your whole deal. Or worse, somebody leaves and goes to a competitor. So what are you doing? And when we have like BDRs, SDRs, marketing, sales management, executives, partners, they're all updating Salesforce. There's no way to really get a solid deal strategy out of it because there's so many different viewpoints and people would look at it and go, well, I'm not sure what's important, or they're going to take something out of context and they're going to build their deal strategy on the wrong thing.
So
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the whole way we have Salesforce and CRM implemented, because we've turned it into a metrics tracking system, it's lost its ability to be a sales engagement application. It's become a system of record that is misused in the sales engagement world.
So I have earlier my last question for you before we run out of time, and we may have to do another one of these because I love talking with you,
Okay.
and like I said, personally, it's fascinating to me. So earlier we were talking about marketing and marketing's role, and something that I struggle with is, let's say, for example, you're selling to manufacturers, and you know the problem that you help with is throughput, defect reduction,
Yeah.
and so if we're talking about the customer's business, we talk about those, but we have a new way now that we're on the subject of new technology. We have a new way to increase throughput and defect reduction. I'm just wondering, to create that interest up front, I feel like everybody out there in the space is talking about throughput and defect. Everybody knows, talk
Right.
about the customer needs,
Correct.
but we're doing it in a different way. And I've been really struggling with that concept of how do you lead when it is solving an existing problem in a better way? How do you capture interest? And like, oh crap,
Well, the
another
first thing
software
you
guy.
don't
Go ahead.
Yeah, the first thing you don't do is focus on the product, right?
Yes.
But the problem is more fundamental than that. The problem is the internet. So I laugh a lot of times because it's true, but it's funny. So it's a lot harder to develop pipeline today, Brian. When I was young, all the buyers were in their offices. We had to go hunt them down to talk to them. Now they're all on the internet and they come to you, but it's harder to build pipeline. Okay. Why is that? Well, there's both a pro and a con to go and hunt them down. Yeah, I had to go hunt them down individually, but I knew where they were and I could talk to them.
Yeah.
Now they're in a big black hole, right? And so the ability to reach them has become much more difficult digitally.
Yes.
So, how do you solve that problem? Because that's the real problem. The way you solve that problem is, first of all, you focus on the problem. You don't focus on the product. That's the
Yeah.
first thing.
Yes.
The second thing is you got to build digital campaigns, literally, that a BDR would execute, right? Little videos that talk to the prospect about them, about their problems, about the challenges they face. And then you have to give them something, right? Like, hey, we'll do we'd love to see if you're suffering from these issues, and we'll do a little, uh, survey, or we'll do, answer these 10 whatever, and do things with videos, right,
Yeah.
that focus right at that buyer, so that when they don't want to read, they want to click a link and see a story, right? That's much more effective because you now have to go. I have to go to you. So if I have you as a stakeholder in my mapping of my accounts, I want to get to you with a digital campaign, and I got to figure out, is it LinkedIn? Is it email? Is it a website? Do I build my own digital site that you can access that's about your company, you, the issues you face? You have to get very creative now, and you have to focus on the buyer
Yeah.
and personalize things. I
Yeah.
think
And
that
yeah,
solves it.
I just made that
Yeah.
connection. Yeah. Between, as you started with, that marketing campaigns with the emotional journey. So yeah, I'm sincere that I think we need to do another one of these, because I really want to dive under this issue that we just started, that we just started playing with, which is creating that marketing interest, because I have a couple challenges I'd like to present to you. So yeah, if you're willing, I'd love to have you back. And I really,
Yeah, I'd love to come back. I like, close strong, and the way you guys think about things. You're not just buying into the typical, latest and greatest little AI tool or buzzword that people are all jumping on, unless you can understand where it fits
yeah,
and why it's effective.
cool.
So
I
I'd
appreciate
be
that.
happy to come back.
All right. Thank you, sir. We will see you soon. And I really, really appreciate your time. This was so much fun.
You got it.